Move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I call the honourable member for order. Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting, including the Treasurer and the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. The honourable member for Canning has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Acting Prime Minister. Australians are seeing the prices of everything go up under this government, including airfares, which are up as much as 50% from 3 years ago. To add insult to injury, Qantas flights are regularly cancelled and luggage is lost. How many times has the Acting Prime Minister taken a Defence VIP flight from Canberra to Avalon Airport to go home from work?
The call to the Acting Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the Shadow Minister for his question, and certainly these are tough times in terms of the cost of living, and we very much understand the pressures which are upon the budgets of household Australians and businesses, and it is why the focus of our government from the very first day of our election has been on easing the burden of that cost of living, be it seeking to increase the minimum wage, be it providing for more affordable childcare, cheaper medicines, putting downward pressure on our energy bills.
Order. Members on my right. I'll hear from the member for Canning on a point of order.
Relevant, Speaker. We know the minister can
Resume
stretch
your
himself.
seat. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Order. Member for Deakin. I'll give the order. Members on my left. Give the call to the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, not only was the Acting Prime Minister speaking specifically on the issues that were in the preamble of that question, every part of the point of order was a deliberate abuse of trying to get up some pre-prepared lines. He knew exactly what he was doing, and it was a complete abuse.
Order. The member for Hume and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. The Leader of the House and the Leader of the Nationals will cease interjecting. The member for Canning understands the standing orders and will not abuse them. The Acting Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you,
The member
Mr
for Barker.
Speaker. And in every one of those efforts, we acted in the face of the opposition of those opposite. Now,
Order.
Mr Speaker, as I said on Tuesday, everywhere I have been
Order.
and everything
Members
that
on my
I
left.
have done has been in pursuit of my duties, acting on behalf of the Australian people, and I stand by every flight that I took on the special purpose aircraft or commercially. But, Mr Speaker,
Order.
I would also make this point. The question
Member
that
for
we
Casey.
just heard from the Shadow Minister is the 8th question that he has asked since the election. Now, in that time, we have made a decision to acquire nuclear-powered submarines. That was quite a big deal. Not a single question on that. We made a decision to engage in the single biggest reposturing of Australia's Defence Force. Not a single question on that. But now we have had 3 questions on the special purpose aircraft. Those opposite get 70 minutes each and every parliamentary day to raise the most significant questions facing the Australian people, and this is what the Shadow Minister chooses to raise. And it says everything about a party which gave us 7 different defence ministers in the course of the last decade, who could not make a decision in relation to our submarine capability, opening up enormous capability gaps, and was always in relation, never about the policy, always about the politics. But, Mr Speaker, we didn't need to know that to understand this, because on the 4th of January 2020 we absolutely understood how they were about the politics. When in the face of the biggest bushfires that we had as a country, they used the Australian Defence Force to cut an ad to raise money for the Liberal Party. Always about the politics, never about the policy.
Before I call the member for Wills, the level of noise is completely unacceptable. The level of noise yesterday was completely unacceptable. I'm issuing a general warning today. There won't be any more warnings. People will just be excluded by their behaviour. Give the call to the member for Wills.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Acting Prime Minister. What is the importance of a person honouring their word in managing our international relationships, in our national security and in governing Australia?
Order. Give the call to the Acting Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question. On Tuesday, the Leader of the Opposition said on indulgence, "I want to offer very strong words of support to the Prime Minister. We wish the PM every success in the trip because it is important for our country's future." And as our Prime Minister embarked on an important series of engagements in the Indo-Pacific, the sentiment was welcome. But within one day, yesterday, as Hansard now records, the Leader of the Opposition was mocking the Prime Minister for going on this very trip. And, Mr Speaker, this is the starkest insight into the attitude which in government saw those opposite completely trash our international relationships, leaving Australia's global standing in the worst position that it has ever been. It saw the stopping of trade and the loss of thousands of Australian jobs, which this government has had to rebuild. The constant addiction to low-rent politics is why we saw a revolving door of defence ministers give rise to a lost decade in defence policy, but they still had the time to use the Australian Defence Force to cut an ad to raise money for the Liberal Party. But what yesterday revealed the most was the character of the Leader of the Opposition. Yes, there was the trademark anger, the want to wreck. But what we now know is that the value of the Leader of the Opposition's word lasts for precisely 24 hours. What he says today is literally meaningless tomorrow. And when the Leader of the Opposition says that there is an issue above politics, what the Australian people now know is that he is only ever about the politics. And in that, as his position as the Leader of his party actually denotes, he is the genuine heir of the Morrisonian legacy. Australians cannot trust this man to act in their interest, but they can rely completely on the fact that no matter what the stakes, he will always act in his own personal interest. For those of us who are a part of the Albanese Labor government, it is genuinely the great privilege of our lives. But that privilege is grounded in our having the opportunity to be in the service of the Australian people. And in that, Mr Speaker, the Albanese Labor government is completely committed to working for Australia.
Give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. Can the Minister inform the House which of her Cabinet colleagues she consulted with prior to making her decision on the application for additional Qatar Airways flights to and from Australia on July 10?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Regional Development, Transport and Local Government.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And as I said yesterday, as you'd expect, my department undertook consultations with all the relevant aviation stakeholders, and I was well aware of different stakeholder views when I took this decision. As you would know, as a former Minister for Infrastructure in the transport portfolio, as would transport ministers. You would regularly consult with ministerial colleagues, but this is a pretty routine decision that ministers make, and particular a routine decision that Ministers for Transport takes. I certainly consulted with ministerial colleagues, but the decision was mine. Unlike those opposite, we do have a government of ministerial responsibility, and we don't have.
Order.
We do have a government that runs by ministerial responsibility, and unlike those opposite, who had a Prime Minister who signed himself into all of your ministries because he didn't trust you.
Has the minister concluded her answer? Order. Give the call to the honourable member for Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. After years of inaction, how is the Albanese Labor government delivering a more competitive aviation sector while at the same time securing Australian jobs and strengthening consumer rights?
Order. The minister will pause. The member for Deakin will leave the chamber under 94A. And I'm going to ask the member to restate the question. And if anyone interjects in this question, they will join the member for Deakin. The member for Adelaide has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. After years of inaction, how is the Albanese Labor government delivering a more competitive aviation sector while at the same time securing Australian jobs and strengthening consumer rights?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Can I thank the member for Adelaide very sincerely for that question. I know that he knows just how important aviation is to his city and the huge potential Adelaide has as a growing international travel destination. Today I am very proud that the government released the Aviation Green Paper. This is an important step in undertaking consultative and genuine reform of the aviation sector, because this government does understand the importance of Australia's aviation sector to the economic prosperity of our nation and to the lives of all Australians who rely on this critical service. But as we know, the previous government left the aviation policy space in absolute tatters. They gave billions of dollars of taxpayer dollars to Qantas with no strings attached. They stood by, frankly, as Virgin collapsed into administration, only for it to be snatched up by foreign private equity. They saw the mass outsourcing of jobs and a labour hire mess that drove down wages across this sector.
Minister will pause. The manager of opposition business on a point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, the minister was asked about what she's doing to deliver a more competitive aviation.
Resume your seat. The question. The minister will cease interjecting. The question was included years of inaction. She is entitled to compare and contrast as a result of that part of the statement, and give her the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As you stated, I was asked about the years of inaction, and of course we saw the previous government give billions of dollars of taxpayer monies to Qantas for no strings attached, stood by as Virgin collapsed into administration only for it to be snatched up by foreign private equity. They saw the mass outsourcing of jobs and a labour hire mess that drove down wages and conditions across the sector. They commissioned the Harris Review into the Sydney airport, only to spend almost 2 years sitting on it, leaving it for us to sort out. They cut JobKeeper to Donata workers and left those families in the lurch. Well, today marks a turning point. the Aviation Green Paper is an important step in developing our sector out to 2050. We want an aviation sector that maintains Australia's world-leading safety and security standards. We want an aviation sector with stronger consumer protections and that provides secure jobs now and into the future.
The Minister will pause. The member for Herbert has been continuing interjecting during this answer and every other answer since I've issued the warning. He will leave the chamber under 94A. This minister will be heard in silence. Minister in continuation.
Thank you. We want an aviation sector that is reliable, it is competitive and it is affordable. And that is what Australians expect and deserve from our aviation industry. That's why we've released the Aviation Green Paper today, to gather the views of the aviation sector, people who rely on it and people who are employed in it. The Aviation Green Paper highlights particularly the critical role that aviation plays in our regions, who rely on aviation services to access everything from education to health care. The Green Paper considers how we will transition our aviation industry to net zero, another space those opposite vacated when they were in government. We know the Green Paper wants to look at stronger consumer protections, improvements to complaint handling processes and improved accessibility for people with disabilities. I encourage everyone to engage with that process. We need an aviation sector that is strong in this country.
Give the call to the honourable member for Mayo.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure. Minister, on the 1st of May 2023, you announced a 90-day review of infrastructure projects. This decision is causing delay and frustration, particularly for projects underway, such as the October 2020 announced $250 million upgrade to the South Eastern Freeway in my electorate. Minister, we're now at day 130. When will you provide certainty to my community that the long-standing infrastructure promises made will indeed be honoured?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you, and I thank very much the member for Mayo for both her question and also for her long-standing advocacy for the people of her electorate. I know she has been in this place for a long period of time and feels very strongly about delivering for her community. As I have already said in the media, I've recently received the independent strategic review of the infrastructure investment report. It is a fairly lengthy and complex report, but it does highlight, which I think even the member's question does, just how badly the Liberals and Nationals managed the infrastructure pipeline during their wasted decade. I am considering the report in detail and a government response to the recommendations will be announced in due course. It does involve complex negotiations with every state and territory. But I can give you some of the highlights from the report today. The review has found, in fact, that in the pipeline that there is $33 billion of known cost pressures. That is what those previous actually presided over. $33 billion of known cost overruns across all infrastructure investment program projects, 41% of the total budget for the infrastructure program. And it also states that there is a very, very high risk of future cost overruns, because this is the mess left by those opposite. They were so fixated on the press release, so fixated on the announcements, and in fact the review highlights very significantly that the previous government tripled the number of projects in 2015 and in 2019, both leading into election years. And the problem you've got when you had a government that was so fixated on the press release and could not deliver, that you have now got an infrastructure investment pipeline that is $33 billion in known cost overruns. We're making our way through that report. We're working with states and territories on that to provide certainty to community. But this is yet again, the absolute mess and disgrace that those opposite left when it comes to infrastructure into this country. We want to get on with the business of delivering. You can't drive on a press release, and those opposite should be absolutely ashamed of themselves, of the state that they have left the infrastructure pipeline in.
The member for Riverina. The call to the honourable member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What do this week's national accounts say about the importance of responsible economic management, and what approaches has the government rejected?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the outstanding member for Bennelong for his question. The national accounts this week provided an important snapshot of our economy. Our economy is steady and sturdy in the face of some pretty intense pressure. It's holding up pretty well despite the rate rises which are already in the system and the slowdown in China. Now, we are optimistic about the future of our economy, the future of our country, but we are also realistic about pressures on Australians right now, the way that our economy is slowing and the difficult months that we anticipate ahead. Now, there is always a premium on responsible economic management, but especially in uncertain times like these. That's why we are working for Australia to roll out relief, getting wages moving again, getting the budget in better nick, investing in the future and cleaning up the mess that was left behind by those opposite. Now, we're seeing welcome progress in moderating inflation and in the national accounts, especially when it comes to wage and salary income over the last financial year, growing at the fastest rate in 3 decades. We see it in the fastest employment growth over the last financial year than at any time in any financial year since 1985, Mr Speaker. 500,000 jobs created on our watch, more people in work and earning more, the first surplus in 15 years, all of that putting us in good stead for the uncertainties ahead. Now, Mr Speaker, that's what responsible economic management looks like, and that's what's been missing for the wasted decade before we came to office. And speaking of the last decade, Mr Speaker, I heard the member for Bendigo, the member for Capricornia and others say that today is the 10th anniversary of the 2013 election. I congratulate my colleagues on their anniversary, even the member for Hume, as I understand it. Now, having been here for a decade now, even the member for Hume, I'm sure, it's not lost on him how strange and unusual and potentially unprecedented it was that in the week of an RBA board decision and the national accounts, he's yet to ask me a single question this week. Not about the economy, not about anything at all, not even a how's it going, Mr Speaker, not a single question from the member, the Shadow Treasurer opposite. And the lengths they went to yesterday to prevent him asking a question. They sat there and they had a choice. Should we let the member for Canning humiliate himself, or should we let the member for Hume humiliate himself?
The Treasurer will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
On relevance, Mr Speaker, even on the broadest interpretation of the words "what approaches has the government rejected," this continuation of the Treasurer's abuse and lack of respect for the Shadow Treasurer needs to stop. It's unparliamentary. He's a serial offender. If he's got nothing useful to say, he should sit down.
The member for Hume has the MPI today. If the member for Hume interjects once more, we will not be having an MPI. That's your responsibility. Just going to ask the Treasurer to return to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. You make a good point. The Shadow Treasurer does have the MPI today, and that's a reminder. It gives the press conferences before question time and the speeches after question time, but never in prime time. Never does he ask me a question in prime time when the nation is watching. And that's because the responsible economic management that we are providing is unrecognisable to those opposite, because they spent the best part of a decade making a mess of our economy and a mess of our budget, and I spend a great deal of my time cleaning it up.
Give the call to the Honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. Can the Minister confirm the date the Prime Minister or his office was informed of her decision on the application for additional Qatar Airways flights to and from Australia?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. The member for Barker will leave under 94A. Anyone else who wants to interject before a minister even speaks can leave now. The Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. As I've repeatedly said, these are routine decisions of government. There's nothing remarkable about Transport Ministers making decisions on international air service agreements to reflect our national interest. I've done it. We did it when we were last in office, and former ministers opposite did exactly the same. I acknowledge that the member for Riverina is noting that. On the 10th of July, I took the decision not to agree to Qatar's Civil Aviation Authority's request to double by 28 services a week the number of flights from Australia's 4 major airports, 4 times any request that has ever been made before, 4 times any request that's ever been granted before. I informed the Prime Minister.
Order. The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat.
Thank you. I informed the Prime Minister prior to my decision being made public, and normally these decisions are not made public. And for context, my office had received multiple media requests about the women who were escorted off a Qatar Airways flight in Doha and subject to invasive searches, and their views on the air services agreement request from
the Deputy
Qatar.
Leader of the Opposition has asked a question.
Can I just say, the Deputy Leader, this is constant. I'm just about to get to that. I'm just about to get to that.
The Leader of the Opposition can just listen to the Minister. I want to hear what she has to say in response to the Deputy Leader's question just as much as anyone.
And again, I said, for context, my office had received multiple media requests about the women who were escorted off a Qatar Airways flight in Doha and subject to invasive searches, and their views on the air services agreement request from Qatar. We responded to the media request on the 18th of July, by which point the Prime Minister was aware of the decision that I had made.
Give the call to the honourable member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government working to strengthen Medicare? Why is urgent action needed to repair the damage caused by a decade of cuts and neglect to Australia's primary health care system?
The call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, thank you, Speaker, and I thank the terrific member for Pearce for her question. Such an amazing representative of the northern suburbs of Perth, first as Mayor and now as a widely respected member of our government in this place. And she understands the critical importance of strengthening Medicare. I remember when I first met her, she told me that her constituents had been telling her it was never harder, never more less affordable to see a doctor than it was right then back last year. And we know that after 10 years of cuts and neglect to Medicare, Mr Speaker, that bulk billing rates were in serious decline when we came to government and gap fees were rising sharply. And that's why the Treasurer, in the May budget this year, delivered a $6.1 billion strengthening Medicare package. The centrepiece of that package was the biggest investment into bulk billing in the 40-year history of Medicare, tripling the bulk billing incentive. And we also, Mr Speaker, delivered the biggest across-the-board increase to the Medicare rebate in more than 30 years. Since Paul Keating was Prime Minister, in 1 year, more than the former government managed in 6 long years to increase the Medicare rebate. Now, Mr Speaker, we also recognise that GPs deserve more than just our thanks after their extraordinary efforts over the 3.5 years of the pandemic. They deserve tangible support to strengthen their practices, which is why we've delivered $220 million in strengthening Medicare practice grants, including to 38 general practices in the member for Pearce's electorate. And, Mr Speaker, I'm happy to say the member for Pearce and I visited the Clarkson Medicare Urgent Care Centre last week, one of the 58 urgent care centres will be opening over the course of this year. The waiting room was full, mainly with parents with kids who had urgent but non-life-threatening emergencies, which we're all familiar with as parents, people who would likely have been waiting hours and hours in the Joondalup emergency department if the urgent care centre hadn't been open. Dr Koh the terrific manager of that practice told us how busy the urgent care centre had been in the short time it had been open. Just one of the centres operating 7 days a week, extended hours and fully bulk billed, Mr Speaker, delivering urgent care in the community when and where people need it and taking much-needed pressure off our hospital emergency departments. So, Mr Speaker, tripling the bulk billing incentive, the biggest increase to the Medicare rebate in more than 30 years, strengthening Medicare practice grants to more than 6,800 general practices and rolling out Medicare urgent care centres right across Australia. That's our commitment to strengthening Medicare.
Give the call to the Minister for Home Affairs and Cybersecurity is warned. The member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. Can the minister confirm the exact date when the Prime Minister or his office were informed of her decision on the application for additional Qatar Airways flights to and from Australia?
I'm just going to ask the member to restate the question.
To the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport, can the minister confirm the exact date when the Prime Minister or his office were informed of her decision on the application for additional Qatar Airways flights to and from Australia?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thanks. Can I thank the member for Hume for his question and also for restating it? I genuinely didn't hear the last part of the question there. As I just said previously, I took the decision on July 10 not to agree to Qatar Civil Aviation Authority's request to double their flights into Australia. I informed the Prime Minister prior to my decision being made public. This is not something that's routinely done. You normally would not.
The Minister will pause. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Speaker, this is the second attempt to ask the Minister for a direct answer. The question is—
Order. Members on my right.
The question is deliberately drafted in accordance with your previous directions about the tightness of questions. There can be no ambiguity about what is being asked. The Minister has been asked for a second time, and I seek your ruling, Mr Speaker, in relation to whether the Minister is relevant to the question that has been asked.
Well, the Minister has entitled to a preamble. She's had 30 seconds in. A point of relevance has been taken. She's so far mentioned a date that I heard her say. I'm going to listen to her carefully to make sure her answer is relevant to the question. Under the standing orders, her answer must remain relevant to the question.
Thanks. As I said, I took the decision on July 10, so that's the first date that you've asked. I did inform the Prime Minister prior to my decision being made public, and it's not something that is—
Order.
It is not something that is routinely done. I doubt very much whether the former minister did.
The member for Bowman will leave the chamber under 94A.
Done. Thank
Minister
you.
will pause. This is not an excuse to be— that was to be simply yelling at anyone at the dispatch box. Minister, in continuation.
Thanks. And as I said, for context, I had received multiple media requests about the women that is well canvassed now. I responded to the media request on the 18th of July, by which point the Prime Minister was aware of the decision I had made. In that same conversation I had with the Prime Minister, he let me know that he had had a conversation with the Virgin CEO, which he has canvassed.
We're moving to the next question. You may ask me a question at the end of question time. What's your point of order?
In relation to disorderly conduct in this chamber, I seek your clarification, Mr Speaker, in relation to the conduct of the Minister. The Minister was asked a specific question on 2 occasions.
Resume your seat. You're asking me a question about a minister who has concluded her answer about whether the answer was in line with your view or whether the question was being answered. Is that right? To raise a point of order. The Leader of the Opposition has the call.
Much, Mr Speaker. I'm asking for your... this has been a fairly volatile question time. You've excluded a number of colleagues,
Order.
Mr Speaker, and so in efforts to help you... Well, Mr Speaker, the Minister interjects. The standing orders operate equally to each side. I'm trying to make a point, Mr Speaker, to you.
We'll get on with it.
Well, I will. And the point, Mr Speaker, is that the Minister has been asked with a specific question whether or not she can nominate the date. Now, if she wants to take it on notice, that's fine. But the point is, Mr Speaker, that she cannot be in order, and I seek your clarification as to whether or not you will enforce the standing orders to instruct the Minister to answer the question that's been asked.
Order. I hear from the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, under standing orders and under practice, a point of order is taken about an event at the time. The point of order on direct relevance was taken at the time. Your ruling was given immediately. The answer has now concluded. What's just been put by the Leader of the Opposition, maybe it's a question to the Speaker, I don't know, but it's certainly no longer a point of order because the question's concluded. There's no ruling you can possibly make.
Under the standing orders, page 53, on Standing Order 104, I'll read for the benefit of the House so people understand exactly what we're talking about. When it comes to answers of ministers, 104A, an answer must be directly relevant to the question. A point of order regarding relevance may be taken only once in respect of each question, and the duration of each answer is limited to 3 minutes. The Leader of the Opposition took a point of order on relevance. I explained to the House where I was at with dealing with the Minister. There is nothing in the standing orders to allow the Leader of the Opposition to simply get up and say, at the conclusion of an answer, was that answer fulsome, was that answer enough? So if there are questions, I'm happy to take them at the end of question time to do with the administration of the parliament. In the meantime, we're going to move to the next question. I'm going to give the call to the honourable member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. What work are the Australian Federal Police and the Australian Centre for Counter Child Exploitation doing to tackle the scourge of child sexual abuse, and how can Australians help?
Give the call to the Honourable the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Werriwa for her question. This week is National Child Protection Week. One of the Albanese government's top priorities is keeping children safe. The Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation, led by the Australian Federal Police, does extraordinary work to prevent harm to children. The task is great. Last year alone, the Centre received more than 40,000 reports of online child exploitation. Currently, the Centre's work involves the manual examination of tens of thousands of images each year. A project called My Pictures Matter can change that. The Australian Federal Police and Monash University are inviting adult Australians to share images of themselves as children to support a new ethical artificial intelligence tool that will detect child abuse material in videos or photos shared online or seized during criminal investigations. This new tool will be able to quickly detect child abuse material on websites and offenders' electronic devices and triage them for investigators. The project was launched in 2022, but it needs more images to succeed. I understand that if just 100,000 Australian adults contribute a photo from their childhood, the tool can be put to work within 12 months. I'll be sharing an image of my childhood to support this project, and I hope other members will too. All adult Australians can take up the fight against child abuse by sharing a photo of themselves. Visit mypicturesmatter.org, upload a picture and help keep our children safe.
On indulgence, I'll give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much. Mr Speaker, well, I want to congratulate the Attorney-General and through him the Australian Federal Police on this initiative. The technology that the Attorney-General refers to has led to breakthroughs in investigations already, and that it goes to the next stage is a great credit to the investigators and those who run the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation. When you visit the centre, you can sense the palpable dynamic there, the not-for-profit organisations who are there with the investigators, providing support to victims, but also helping to disseminate a message of information and awareness. And as the Attorney-General rightly points out, during this week I'd encourage all Australian families and parents to go to the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation website. There are 5 steps, 5 messages there that that the ACE is asking parents to be aware of, and it's an engagement, having a conversation, an awareness of what your kids are looking at online, even though it's difficult to have that conversation. It's about reporting the information to the authorities so that another victim can't fall to the hands of one of these monstrous individuals. There's a lot more information, particularly around the protections, the settings on phones and on devices. It's the most important issue that our country can deal with in protecting our children, and we stand with the government in providing additional resources and every effort and support to those who are working at the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation.
I give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. Can the Minister confirm the exact date the Prime Minister or his office were informed of her decision on the application for additional Qatar Airways flights to and from Australia?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
I refer to my previous answer.
Give the call to the honourable member for Macon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment and Water. How is the Albanese Labor government acting to protect Australia's threatened species, and what are the threats facing our native plants and animals?
Call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thank you so much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Macon, who I know is a great fan of our beautiful Australian wildlife. We saw members of parliament from both sides today and from this chamber and the other place visiting our wonderful animals brought into parliament by Aussie Ark, Wildbark, Priam, Australian National Botanic Gardens and ACT Wildlife, bringing those animals and plants in for Threatened Species Day. I want to thank the conservationists who brought the animals in, the scientists who came in today and the volunteers who care for injured animals. We saw all of them bringing little Tassie devils, Charlie and Lola, Pebbles the wombat, Banjo the blue-tongued lizard, Marshmallow the python, a glossy black cockatoo called 50, Marla the joey and a range of other very beautiful Australian animals. It really was a celebration of native wildlife today, Mr Speaker. So thank you to those who brought the animals in, and thank you to the members of parliament who came along to see them. But of course, Threatened Species Day has a very serious message as well. And today we released a number of additional documents that will better protect our threatened species, including a document for consultation on how we deal with the enormous threat that is feral cats in Australia. We know that cats kill about 6 million animals in Australia every night. Cats kill about 6 million animals every night. We know that they've played a role in about 2/3 of extinctions that have already occurred in Australia, and that there are about another 200 animals on the threatened species list that are vulnerable to cat predation. So we're releasing a consultation document because we know that, of course, there is a role for the Commonwealth Government, there's a role for state and territory governments, and there is very certainly a role for local councils and other organisations in dealing with the threat posed by cats attacking native animals. We saw a great example of one of the responses to feral cat predation, and that was the Felixer machine, one that we are seeing rolled out across Australia, dealing with feral cats. We want to make sure that we provide cat-free environments, islands and fenced areas and other solutions to prevent feral cats attacking Australian animals. Mr Speaker, our government is investing $500 million in protecting against these threats.
Has concluded. Before I call the member for Warringah,
thank you, Mr Speaker.
Before I call the member for Warringah, I just want to welcome. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is Ms Anne Genete, the member of the French Parliament and President of the France-Australia Friendship Group. On behalf of the House, welcome to the Australian Parliament and Question Time. And in the Northern Gallery today, we have school students from Mitcham Primary School in the member for Boothby's electorate. That way. And I give the call to the member for Warringah.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Treasurer. Small businesses make up 97.5% of businesses in Australia, and they are facing a perfect storm of impossible cash flow situations with high interest rates and increased levels of debt from COVID, delayed rents now falling due and also rising. Add to this high energy prices, supply and staff shortages and a downturn in consumer confidence and spending, and many are facing closure. What additional measures will the government consider, including delaying ATO reporting requirements, to assist them through this difficult period?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member for Warringah for her question and also for the opportunity to speak with her about some of these issues in recent days. We do know that Australian small businesses are doing it tough. I agree with you. And this is because, as you rightly identify, the inflationary pressures that they are under and the ongoing impact of higher interest rates as well. And while we know that the vast majority of Australian businesses meet their obligations, we do understand that for different reasons some are struggling to do that. There was a pause on collections during COVID, and this year the ATO has increased its engagement to try and help businesses catch up on their tax and superannuation obligations. We do understand that this can be difficult, but it does ensure that businesses that don't meet their tax obligations don't get an unfair advantage over those that do follow the rules. Now, the ATO does provide support to businesses who need help meeting their tax obligations, including payment plans. There are also a number of steps that they can take to help businesses stay on top of their obligations: SMS messages, MyGov, phone calls, overdue letters and the like. So if a small business is struggling, whether it's in the member for Warringah's area or indeed any of the communities represented here in this House, I encourage them to reach out to the ATO as soon as possible to discuss what payment options might be available. The ATO is willing to work with businesses to help them meet their obligations, but in order for that to happen, we need the small business to reach out to the ATO. They will always try and work with people who are genuinely trying to meet their obligations. Now, the member for Warringah asks me about new measures to support small business, and here I pay tribute to the Small Business Minister for the new measures that we are funding in recognition of the difficult circumstances that small businesses face. Whether it's the Small Business Energy Incentive, whether it's the targeted energy bill relief that those opposite voted against in this place, whether it is the instant asset write-off, the industry growth plan in the Industry Minister's portfolio, the cyber wardens. And this comes on top of course, all of the support we're already providing, digital solutions, changing the Commonwealth procurement rules to favour small businesses, help with unfair contract terms, making sure small businesses are paid on time, the work we're doing on the franchising sector. All of this is in recognition of the genuine pressures that small businesses in particular are under. We are grateful for the representation of the member for Warringah. We encourage small businesses to reach out if they need help as the ATO continues its important work.
The call to the honourable member for Paterson.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Workplace Relations and Employment. How does the Albanese Labor government's Closing the Loopholes bill help deliver pay and conditions working Australians are entitled to? And has there been any misinformation in response to this bill?
Order. give a call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts. Order.
So, just to raise the tone. Mr Speaker, thank you very much. And I want to thank the member for Paterson for the question. Someone who in particular her whole time here has been calling on this parliament to close the labour hire loophole that affects so many of the miners in her electorate. Now, when we were announcing the closing loopholes legislation, a few months ago an ad campaign started. And I said right from the start that the ad campaign was incorrect and the legislation was never going to do what the ads were claiming, that somehow you'd lose the capacity to pay someone who has a lot of experience a different rate to someone who is brand new. And so now that legislation is there, that ad of misinformation, I'm pleased to tell the parliament they've stopped it. They've now replaced it with 2 ads of different forms of misinformation. And I just want to explain one of those 2. It's an ad authorised by the National Farmers Federation. And the National Farmers Federation, I've been dealing with them for a long time, right back to when I was Agriculture Minister. As an organisation, they often provide very good advice on policy. They've never been that good when it comes to rights of workers, historically. They just haven't been. Now, in the ad, now it's about National Farmers Federation.
Order.
In the ad that they've launched, they've said,
Order. Members on my right, I can't hear what the minister is saying because there is far too much noise in the chamber. I want to hear from the member for Wannon on a point of order.
Speaker, the NFF aren't here to defend themselves.
Resume your seat. The member order. The member for Wannon. You're asking for a withdrawal on behalf of an organisation outside the parliament. Is that the point of order? Order. I think resume your seat. Yes. The Leader of the House, to the point of order.
I think the standing orders apply the same to employer organisations as they do to worker organisations.
That's right.
Exactly the same.
Order. The Minister will sit. The Minister will just pause a moment. The Minister for Employment and the Environment will cease dejecting. The member for Wannon, I just need you to state the point of order, not give a statement. The member for Wannon has the call.
I said it would assist the House if the minister withdrew that.
Resume your seat. Yeah. The member for McEwen will leave the chamber under 94A. I didn't hear what he said. Oh, before the member for McEwen leaves, I just want to see if he can withdraw his statement that he just said, because I didn't hear what it said, but I'm just going to ask him to come back and withdraw.
Let the grown-ups talk. I withdraw.
Order. The member for McEwen will leave the chamber. Order. The member for Casey is on thin ice, very thin ice. Just going to continue with the minister's answer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And it might help if I explain what's in the ad. So the ad claims that the labour hire loophole is going to affect farms and therefore is going to affect prices at supermarkets. That's the argument in the ad. Now, I thought, well, hang on. The labour hire loophole only applies if you have an enterprise agreement. So how many farms in Australia have an enterprise agreement that this loophole could possibly be used? And yet certainly there's some, but as a percentage of the industry to work it out. So I went to the regulatory impact statement that was prepared independently for the bill. And I'll admit here there are rounding errors. But for the sector, where they say proportion of employees on enterprise agreements, so there'll be a rounding error here, it's only to the nearest 1/10 of 1%. But the figure is 0.0. 0.0%. And so I thought, well, what could it be that they're opposed to in the bill? If they're not affected by the one that's actually in the ad, It's not exactly gig economy work. So many of the casuals are itinerant, they never qualify for the casuals exemption, but there is one part that the bill closes down that is a real problem in agriculture, and it is wage theft. That is the measure most relevant. Take cases of people like Kate Sue, paid $4 an hour picking oranges, who went to a dumpster diving to get food at the back of a Coles because she wasn't earning enough money. Talk to the Ombudsman who found the mango farmer who, out of 12 workers, 4 were paid nothing and the others were paid as little as $2.68 an hour. They are affected, but the ads are dishonest.
The member for Riverina. I want you to be quiet. The Leader of the Opposition has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I seek leave to move the following motion. That the House, 1, expresses its concern that this government appears to have done a sweetheart deal with Qantas Airways to block the application for additional flights to and from Australia by Qatar Airways. 2, notes that the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development, A, has failed to give any clear or consistent explanation for this decision, has offered up to 9 different explanations, and C, has shown she has a selective memory, being somehow unable to recall any details of discussing the matter with Qantas, the principal financial beneficiary of her decision, even though she does have recall of other meetings she had over this matter. 3, condemns the Albanese government for decreasing competition in the aviation market and increasing air travel prices for Australian families. 4, reminds the Albanese government that it promised before and after the last election to be transparent and honest with the Australian people. And 5, notes that the Albanese government has clearly broken this promise with its efforts to avoid a proper scrutiny in the House regarding its sweetheart deal with Qantas.
Is leave granted? The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I seek leave. Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I move that so much of the standing orders be suspended as would prevent the Leader of the Opposition from moving the following motion. That the House, 1, expresses its concern that this government appears to have done a sweetheart deal with Qantas Airways to block the application for additional flights to and from Australia by Qatar Airways. 2, notes that the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development, A, has failed to give any clear or consistent explanation for this decision. B, has offered up to 9 different explanations. And C, has shown she has a selective memory, being somehow unable to recall any details of discussing this matter with Qantas, the principal financial beneficiary of her decision, even though she does have recall of other meetings she had over this matter. 3, condemns the Albanese government for decreasing competition in the aviation market and increasing air travel prices for Australian families. 4, reminds the Albanese government that it promised before and after the last election to be transparent and honest with the Australian people. And 5, notes that the Albanese government has clearly broken this promise with its efforts to avoid proper scrutiny in the House regarding its sweetheart deal with Qantas.
The Leader of the House.
Under Standing Order 47E, I'll require, given we effectively had this debate yesterday, I'll require that this be dealt with immediately after the MPI.
We'll move to the next question. I'll give the call to the honourable member for Fraser.
My question is to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme. How does the minister respond to some of the fear campaigns being directed at NDIS participants by digital disability platforms like Mable?
The call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services.
I thank the member for Fraser for his question. This goes to the issue of the industrial relations reform and the NDIS and misinformation. Just to set the scene for the House, there are 610,000 participants on the NDIS. There are about 325,000 workers in the sector. They're employed by a variety of ways, principally enterprise agreements, awards, casuals. A relatively small number, about 2%, are employed at any one time through NDIS provider platforms. An NDIS provider platform refers broadly to businesses who are online intermediaries connecting workers with participants. Some of the online providers, there's about 12, are registered, some are not. Mabel is a for-profit unregistered NDIS provider platform. It charges 17% on every dollar transacted, 10% from the worker and 7.95% from the disabled person. Recently, Mabel has made some regrettable, arguably paranoid comments to some NDIS participants about the new IR reforms. For me, the judgment about these reforms in terms of the NDIS starts with the principle that NDIS participants have a right to quality services and to safe services. Therefore, the industrial relations issues concerning people on these care work platforms are important. We need a fit-for-purpose industrial relations system to help the NDIS focusing on participants receiving safe and high-quality services. In addition, disability workers should have quality careers, secure work, basic standards, and they should not be underpaid. However, in evidence given to the Disability Royal Commission March this year by Dr Fiona McDonald of RMIT, she said there are concerns that the care work platforms are controlling labour, setting prices, disciplining workers, while avoiding the risks and costs and the responsibility of employment. The proposed changes go to the responsibility to maintain minimum standard for disability workers. Adhering to minimum standards builds quality workforce, secure workforces, ultimately delivers higher quality, safer service for people with disability. I hear daily from participants and their families about the need for high-quality services, but participants and families shouldn't have to choose between flexibility on one hand and quality on the other. The NDIS is driven by the principle of people being able to choose the service which best suits them. In a competitive market, service providers who deliver quality and flexible services will be absolutely attractive to NDIS participants. The IR legislation reforms do not change any of the above. There is a place in the NDIS market for digital platforms, and in some cases Australians with disability find them convenient. The IR reforms are not changing the form of engagement or the technology. They're just providing guardrails to protect workers. For me, this is ultimately a debate about the safety of participants. Order. So I say to Mabel, loopholes are not a business model in the NDIS. Intermediaries between providers and participants shouldn't be able to cherry-pick the bits of the law they like. And the bits.
Call to the honourable member for Indi.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Housing Minister. I acknowledge the government's commitments of $500 million to the Housing Support Program, $2 billion for the Social Housing Accelerator and $3 billion through the New Homes Bonus. But despite 1 in 3 Australians living outside a major city, not one of these announcements is dedicated to funding housing in regional, rural or remote Australia. Why won't this government guarantee funding for dedicated housing supply in regional Australia?
Give a call to the Minister for Housing, Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Indi for her question. The member for Indi and I have had many conversations about how important it is to make sure that regional Australia does get its fair share of housing, whether they be regional towns, regional centres or regional cities. We do hear very frequently that there are housing shortages, and it's particularly impacting businesses that can't get workers because there's nowhere for them to live, and indeed particularly key workers in essential services. Nurses, doctors, police have nowhere to live in some of these regional towns. So we understand how critical it is. Indeed, we understand how critical it is right across the country, but particularly in those regional towns and the impact that it's having. That's why, of course, we've brought forward our regional first-home buyer guarantee. I'm pleased to update the member that 9,000 people in regional Australia have now bought their own home because we brought forward that program, and we now have over 9,000 Australians that are in their own home because of that. I also want to reassure the member that when it comes to the Housing Accord, the 10,000 affordable homes that the Commonwealth are committed to, that we have taken steps to ensure that each state and territory and indeed regional and rural Australia gets its fair share of homes from the Housing Accord.
The Minister will pause. So I can hear from the point of order from the member for Hume.
Mr Speaker, why isn't the Minister delivering housing to the...
I'll hear from the Leader of the House. Yes, Leader of the House. I'll hear.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I think it's important that a penalty understanding order is taken as a penalty. What we saw just then was an agreement between the member for Hume and the Leader of the Opposition to try to be thrown out so that he doesn't have to give a speech.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Yeah. The Leader of the Opposition and the Leader of the House will resume both your seats. Resume both the seats. Just resume your seat for a moment. Order. The members on my right will cease interjecting, so will members on my left. The member for Hume raised a point of order. I called the Leader of the House on that point of order, and he better get to his point of order.
Under 94A, I suggest the member for Hume, in the interests of the House and the order of the House, should be allowed to stay in the chamber.
Order. Order. The member for Hume, because I'm feeling generous, and it's been a big week, will cease interjecting. And I give the call to the Minister for Housing, Homelessness and Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I'd say the member in Indi and many other people in this room actually care about regional Australia and housing and actually want to hear this answer, unlike those opposite. Mr Speaker, we're going to make sure, and I reiterate our commitment.
Order. The Minister will come to her conclusion of the answer.
Yes. I reiterate our commitment that under the Housing Australia Future Fund, that the 30,000 houses will be going to regional and rural Australia in their fair share, as well as, of course, around the rest of the country, and each state and territory will get their fair share.
The Minister's concluded her answer.
Yes.
I give the call to the Acting Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed in the response.